This brings us to today's session, and I'm excited to introduce our speaker. Leslie supported the OUSD ANS on the formative pre-CMC efforts that ultimately shaped the CMC program. And she contributed to the first CMC working groups as the program moved from concept to execution. She later submitted substantive comments during the CMC rulemaking focused on scalability and operational efficiency. Since 2020, she worked hands-on with dozens of organizations from small defense contractors to large enterprises, specializing in identifying and designating CUI and the practical implementation of CMMC and NIST 800-171 requirements. Leslie, thanks for being here today, and over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I just want to throw out, if anybody has any questions at any time, put something in the Q&A and Martine or Joe will call it out and ask, and we'll get those questions answered in real time. I want this to be kind of informal, almost conversational in some ways. Everybody has lots of questions about CMMC, and we are not trying to add confusion or complexity. We're trying to make this a little bit easier. But I want to introduce or just give you an overview of the CMMC Launchpad team. Like, who are we? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? So Joe Finsterwald, he's also on the call. Oh, and we're also veterans, something we're very proud of, but also it's it's our driving force behind this, right? Like, we have all answered the call to serve our nation, and now that we're no longer in uniform, we're still trying to provide resources to the government, to the military, to support national security. So Joe's the founder and CTO of Aberrant, which is part of the package solution. It's a cyber GRC tool. Martine works with Joe at Aberrant, and then I'm Leslie Weinstein. Some of you may or may not know me. I've been heavily involved in the CMMC from the beginning. The reason why I got involved in CMMC is because, as Martine alluded to, I worked in OUSD ANS on what we called back then the DIB task. The DepSecDef was figuring out that China was hacking our supply chain, and they had no idea why, because we had this DFARS 7012 clause. So it's been in the contracts for a year. Why aren't the defense, companies doing this? And one thing led to another, and now we have CMMC. So the reason why we created the CMMC Launchpad is because all three of us, as former military, as cybersecurity professionals, people working in technology, we recognize this consistent problem, regardless of type of company, size of company, length of company. They all seem to be struggling with the same questions and problems relating to CMMC and cyber compliance. So we created this bundle where we bundle a cyber GRC tool, some of my advisory services, and then policy templates. Policy templates are not plug and play. You need to figure out how they should apply to your company, and that's where the advisory services come in. And then the cyber GRC tool. When I first met Joe, I told him that his biggest competitor was an Excel spreadsheet, because unless his tool was easier to use than my Excel spreadsheet that I've used and perfected over the last 5 or 6 years, then I didn't really need a tool. But his tool, like Joe, has listened to feedback, and so he's made a tool that is easier to use than my Excel spreadsheet. So in this session, we're going to talk about the timeline, the history of CMMC. We're going to talk about the CMMC stakeholders. We're going to talk a little bit about the compliance requirements for each of the CMMC levels. We'll talk about some of the DoD resources that are provided for defense contractors to achieve compliance, and then we'll do a little bit of CMMC myth busting. All right, the timeline of CMMC. So the CMMC did not originate in a vacuum. It was not a spark of brilliance. It's almost a natural evolution. I don't know if it was natural, but it's an evolution of the cybersecurity requirements and also this data controlled and classified information, CUI. It seems to be this concept that a lot of people struggle with, and it's been around since 2010. So in 2010, President Obama signed the Executive Order 13556 that established the CUI program, because back in the day, and I can attest to this coming from the intelligence community, we used to slap labels on documents like FOUO or LES for law enforcement sensitive, and SBU, sensitive but unclassified, and every agency seemed to have a different way to mark its unclassified information, but information that shouldn't go to the public. And it was unclear from one agency to another, like, what is SBU? Is that the same as FOUO? I don't know. And there just weren't consistent rules. I spent 2 years at the Defense Intelligence Agency declassifying documents, and we didn't have any guidance for when something is FOUO versus, unclassified for public release. So we were guessing, trying to figure out, is this something that should be public? If not, so the CUI program, while it is confusing and has caused concerns and questions, it is better than what we had before. So after the executive order, the executive order established the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, as the executive agent of the CUI program. And in 2016, they published 32 CFR Part 2002. So it's a regulation published by an executive branch agency, and it establishes the program, the CUI program, but it also is important because that is where NIST 800-171 comes from, and NIST 800-171 is the foundation of CMMC. CMMC controls are NIST 800-171. So it's not that DoD really likes NIST or any special agencies. It's in fact a regulation that applies to any government contractor that handles CUI on behalf of the federal government. They must use NIST 800-171 to protect CUI. And also in 2016, the Department of Defense was the first federal agency to publish the NIST requirements in its own acquisition supplement. So the DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's a supplement to the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So the DFARS 7012 clause was the first acquisition requirement, substantive acquisition requirement that incorporates NIST into the solicitations. So believe it or not, every single defense contractor who handles CUI is supposed to be protecting it using NIST 800-171. This is why you may see people on LinkedIn pushing back on complaints about CMMC when the DIB should be complying with this NIST requirement since 2017, and we're in 2026, so it's almost going 8-9 years now. So between 2018 and 2019, the Department of Defense realized that defense contractors were not, in fact, using NIST 800-171 because China was stealing all sorts of information from our supply chain. This is the time that I was working in the Department of Defense in OUSD ANS on the DIB task. The DepSecDef was wondering how much are companies spending and why aren't they doing this, and how can we make sure that they are doing this? Do we need to force things, or do we need to provide services? They had really no idea how to go about solving this problem. So a couple years later, in 2020, we saw the first CMMC rules being published. Back in 2020, they were published as an interim final rule. They never created a public rule, and there was some other issues. So they had initially published a single interim final rule, and then they, in 24 and 25, ended up creating 2 separate rules. But this rule in 2020 is where we first saw the DFARS 7019 and 7020 clauses. Some of you may be familiar with that. That is the requirement. It goes into a contract with the 7012 clause, so it's kind of like a layered requirement. So the DFARS 7012 says you must do NIST 800-171. 7019 and 7020 say if the Department of Defense asks for it, you must give us your system security plan or your policies and all of those things. And it also says that you must score yourself on your NIST compliance, and then you must use our scoring mechanism. And the scoring mechanism is unique to the Department of Defense. There's no other agencies that use it, to my knowledge. But the DoD published this scoring, this 110 SPRS score, and then you must report that score into SPRS, the Supplier Performance Risk System. That's also the system where you report CMMC scores. But that started back in 2020. In 2024, the DoD finally released its final 32 CFR Part 170. So 32 CFR Part 170, it's this really long description of the CMMC program. It tells you who the players are. It tells you what the security controls are. It tells you everything you need to know about the details of that program. And those details are what you will find in the CMMC assessment guides and the scoping guides. All of those, in theory, originate from the language in the 32 CFR Part 170. And then last year, I guess, yeah, it was last year, not this year. Last year, 48 CFR was updated, and it updated several parts of the DFARS requirements. So it wasn't just one place that was changed, it was a change in a few places. But what that did was created those DFARS clauses that you will see in solicitations and defense contracts. So one thing that I saw in this final rule, the 48 CFR, was that they created a new DFARS clause, like the 7012, the 7019, and 7020 and 21. There's also the DFARS 7022, I believe is what it is, and that is the one that goes into the RFP or the solicitation. It'll say, you know, heads up, CMMC is in here. So it's not going to say heads up DFARS 7021. It should say heads up DFARS 7022. I'm not sure why they did that. They could have just used the 7021, but they did add another one. So it's actually not as long, not nearly as long. The 48 CFR update was not nearly as long as the 32. The 32 is like the substantive meat and potatoes of the requirements, and then the 48 CFR are telling you how it impacts your potential contract. All right, I don't see any questions, so I will keep going. Okay, so who are the CMMC stakeholders? There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of different people from different places, and I want to try to simplify it a little bit, even though this doesn't look super simple with all of the colors. So the four major players, right, are the Department of Defense, the Cyber Accreditation Body, the Cyber AB. They used to be called the CMMC AB, and now they're doing business as the Cyber AB, but it's the same organization, same people. Then we have C3PAOs, and then we have the OSCs, the organizations seeking certification, and those are the defense contractors that have to comply with this requirement. All right, the dots in the corner. So a green dot means it's a government agency, and the blue dots mean that they are private entities. So the Department of Defense, out of these four, is the only government agency. The Department of Defense has a direct relationship with the Cyber AB as part of the background work with the DoD publishing the CMMC stuff. They contracted with the Cyber AB, a no-cost contract for the Cyber AB to serve as the accreditation body. And as the accreditation body, they are the ones who approve the applications from the C3PAOs to become C3PAOs that are recognized by the Department of Defense. But as you see, the Department of Defense has no direct relationship with these C3PAOs. They only have a relationship with the AB, and the AB has a relationship with the C3PAO. And it's the C3PAO that the company is seeking certification have to contract with in order to get a third-party assessment. So again, it's kind of like this three-layer weird relationship situation where we all have to work together in order for the organization seeking certification to obtain a CMMC assessment that is then recognized by the Department of Defense. And within the Department of Defense, there's the DoD CIO. That's the agency that published the regulation. The CMMC did originate in OUSD ANS, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. But at some point in the last 5 years, it transitioned over to the DoD CIO. And then there's also the DIBCAC. The DIBCAC are government employees or contractors in working on behalf of the government. They're the ones who are doing the level 3 assessments for organizations seeking certification, but they are also the ones assessing the C3PAOs in order to be approved by the Cyber AB. So I will pause there for a second to see if there's any questions. I don't see any, so I will keep going. I'm talking really fast, so if there's anything that I am not explaining well, by all means, please add something in the chat and we can dig down a little deeper. All right, so the meat and potatoes of the CMMC compliance requirements. So very broadly speaking, there are 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. And the level that you need, in theory, should be driven by the nature of the information that your company is handling on behalf of the government. I have a feeling that the standard level for contracts will be a level 2, simply because the DFARS 7012 clause, that DFARS clause goes into every single defense contract, whether it's required or not. And the DFARS 7012 clause very clearly says that if you handle CUI, then you must do NIST 800-171. For a contracting officer to select a level 1 for CMMC, it means that they understand that there's no CUI and that all that is going to be handled is FCI. Based on observable conversations on LinkedIn and people in this ecosystem, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of understanding of what CUI is, let alone what FCI is. And I feel like it would be the default selection is to select a level 2 because, you know, better to have more than less. But in theory, there will be contracts with a CMMC level 1, and it applies to contracts that only handle federal contract information. So under these CMMC level 1 solicitations, there should be no handling of CUI. So CUI is unclassified information that is controlled because there is a government-wide policy or regulation or something that says that this, you know, needs to be restricted in its access. It's not for public disclosure. Also, FCI is not for public disclosure, but it's like a little bit less sensitive than the CUI. So the FCI also not publicly releasable, but it doesn't rise to the level of CUI. So you might be wondering, how do you tell the difference between FCI and CUI? And the best way to kind of describe that is to go to the CUI registry. And if the government information you're handling doesn't fit into those categories of CUI, then it cannot be considered CUI. CUI must have a category that it fits into. And if it falls outside of all of those categories, then it must be FCI or maybe classified, hopefully not classified, but it cannot be CUI if it's not in the registry. So everything that's not in the registry should be FCI. And the FCI is protected by a subset of those NIST 800, there's 110 NIST 800-171 controls, and a subset of those are for FCI. So there's 15 cybersecurity controls that apply to FCI. Those have been codified in the FAR 52. It's for every federal contract that handles FCI. They have those same 15 cybersecurity controls, and those are like literally just 15. I don't know which 15, but it is 15 from the 110. They're not changed. Substantively, they may say FCI instead of CUI in the control description, but they are substantively the exact same security requirements. So if you're looking at this as a maturity level, which I don't think it should be viewed as a maturity level, but if you're looking at the CMMC requirements as a maturity process, then these 15 security controls would be the ones that you want to start with. The level 1 is always a self-assessment. There's no score associated with it from what I understand. It's just you do it and because you have to have 100%, that would be why there's no score, because it's a binary pass fail. If you have all of them, you're good. If you do not have all of them, you have to fix them, or else you are not in compliance with these requirements. Okay, CMMC level 2. This is the minimum level necessary to handle CUI on behalf of the government. To protect CUI, you have to implement the 110 security controls from NIST 800-171. And I'm sure most of you know by now that it's not just 110 requirements, it's actually like over 300 requirements because of the assessment objectives that are associated with these controls. So 110 doesn't seem that bad, but it's actually 300. And not only do you have to do these controls, you have to document how you're doing these controls in the system security plan. So in order to do a self-assessment or a third-party C3 PAO assessment, your system security plan and POAM has to be complete and accurate, because an assessment at the end of the day is validating what you're writing in your system security plan, that you're able to collect evidence to prove that what you say you're doing, you're actually doing. It also requires you to have written policies and documentation and procedural things. It can't just be, oh yeah, John does this when we get this requirement, and then Cindy does this over here. It can be simple procedures, but certain things have to be written down and documented, and then addressed in the system security plan, because you have to, in your system security plan, describe how you're implementing these controls, and they have to be how they are actually implemented. So a CMMC level 2 can either be a self-assessment or a C3 PAO third-party assessment. The contract, the solicitation for the the RFP or whatever the government is putting out there saying, we want vendors to bid for this opportunity, and that solicitation should include the level of CMMC required. I've seen a couple people post on LinkedIn where it just says, a solicitation will say just a CMMC level 2, and it does not say self or C3 PAO. So it's kind of ambiguous. But my free advice would be to go do the self-assessment. And if you can pass it, go put it into SPURS. Because then you can say, I have a CMMC level 2. No, it's not a third party, but that's okay because the program allows for these self-assessments. So that might get you a little bit further, or buy you some time. Should people start asking about CMMC, you can say, yes, I have it. Like, stop asking. If you need a third party, that'll be another conversation for later. But the self-assessment is absolutely a real CMMC level. It can go in solicitations, and that could be the end of it. And the kind of, I don't know if it's a good news or not news, but it's the same as the NIST 800-171 self-assessment that people have been having to do already. There's not going to be a score per se. And yes, CMMC does tell you which controls can't have gaps, but you can have some gaps and still claim to have a CMMC level 2 self-assessment. So it's not always a third-party C3 PAO assessment for level 2. So I just want to kind of put stop on that because people get wound up about the third party, but it's not always a third party. And then level 3, in order to get a level 3 CMMC assessment, the DIBCAC has to do it. There's no C3 PAO that can do the level 3 assessment. In the, I think it's an unofficial guidance that DoD has provided. I've not seen this guidance provided elsewhere besides on DoD's website, and it's an informal guidance document. It's not like a policy signed by the secretary or anything, but in some of their unofficial guidance, the DoD is saying that a level 3 should be required for contracts that handle these types of CUI, the controlled technical information that's also export controlled, the DoD critical infrastructure and security information, naval nuclear propulsion information, privileged safety information, and then unclassified controlled nuclear information. I do want to quickly point out that, one, I just graduated from law school, so this is an informed information, but only the contracting officer has the ability to bind the government. So what that means is what the contracting officer asks for and says and does and requires is the requirement. And what DoD CIO puts out in its informal guidance is just informal guidance. It's not binding. It's not, it doesn't create an affirmative obligation for defense contractors. It's more of guidance to the contracting officers more than anything else, but it is the contracting officers that establish your contractual requirements. And if the contracting officer, if that contract handles CTI and they don't think a level 3 is necessary, they don't have to do that. It may give rise to a protest of some sort, but that's something else entirely. It is the contracting officer that establishes the requirement. It's not DoD CIO, it's not OUSD ANS, it's not any official government spokesperson for the CMMC program. It is literally the contracting officer. And kind of along that same vein, the CMMC regulations, when they talk about like this phased implementation where phase 1 will have X amount as CMMC level 1, and then phase 2 will have X amount of whatever, that is great for, anticipating potential demand, but at the end of the day, it's the contracting officer. So if the contracting officer is not following the 32 CFR or 48 CFR, there's really nothing requiring them to do that unless there's some internal mechanisms for DoD to throttle or make them put something in a requirement. It's DoD CIO has no direct control over the contracting officers. So it's kind of nearly impossible to actually anticipate the demand of like a level 2 C3 PAO or a level 3, because it's really at the end of the day up to the contracting officer to make that decision. Okay, resources from the Department of Defense to the Defense Industrial Base. not just for CMMC compliance, but for cyber security and protection more broadly. So the first one I want to call out is DC3. It's the Department of Defense Cyber Crime Center. They're actually based here in Maryland, where I am, and I got my one of my Army IDs updated at that office, and I picked that location just so I could go see where the DC3 is located. But they provide cybersecurity services to defense contractors. You have to prove that you have a defense contract, but as soon as you can prove you have a defense contract, you can go through them. They will enroll you in this program. DC3 and NSA, they both procure services from companies that provide cybersecurity services. They pay for them, they vet them, and then they provide them at no cost to members of the defense industrial base. It's really cool. I think they add services on a regular basis. It's, tool providers can approach them and say, please vet my tool, and then they will undergo some sort of vetting, and then they may or may not be available to, every defense contractor. So the first one is DC3. And then the second one is NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, or CCC is what they call it. They also offer no-cost cybersecurity services to defense contractors. Sub or prime, they have a lot lower requirements for getting services. I think they'll just, if you can prove you have a contract, you're eligible, whereas I think DC3 may have a little bit more stringent requirements for getting onboarded with them. But the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, they also, if you are breached or have a cyber incident, they will provide resources like humans to help you do that investigation and root cause analysis, and they will not get you in trouble if they discover that you are non-compliant. I know a lot of people are sketched out by allowing the government into your information system, especially if you are concerned about not being compliant, but the NSA claims that they are not going to report you to your contracting officer for not being compliant. And then the DoD CIO has a ton of CMMC resources, specifically more just guidance, not any services or anything that they will do for you. But if you have any questions about the assessment process, the scoping requirements, the definitions, go to the CIO's website. They are the authoritative sources for all of those things. So if you hear something crazy on the internet, go look on CIO's website to see if it is in fact true, because there's just a whole lot of noise out there, and the best way to cut through all of the noise is just to go to the original source. And if you go to the original source and you still can't make heads or tails of it, call us. We can answer questions, because it's not, the documentation is not necessarily written in a way that is easily digestible, especially for non-technical people. Okay, and that brings us to the myth busting. The first myth that I want to dispel is the myth that I've been hearing literally from the beginning, from 2020 on, is that the CMMC, when the final rule gets published, it's going to be over for all of you guys, because it's going to be required in every contract and everybody needs CMMC starting November 2025. And in fact, that is not true. The CMMC is not true on its face. There may be situations that arise that you need to start doing it sooner rather than later. But at the end of the day, the CMMC is a contractual obligation. The CMMC is not a law that will strike you down if you don't do it. It is a requirement it's a condition precedent in order to do work with the Department of Defense, if and only if it is in the contract requirements. So if you're bidding on a solicitation that is absolutely silent on CMMC, but it contains the DFARS 7012 clause and the 7019 and 7021, then you do the NIST 800-171 self-assessment and you report your score and you move on. But if you're bidding on a solicitation that has the CMMC requirement, then you should probably do that in order to bid on that contract, because you will not be selected if you do not have the correct CMMC level at the time of contract award. So it's not required to bid on a contract, it's required to win a contract. Also, the reason why I say that some folks may have to do this sooner rather than later is because prime contractors are required to flow down the CMMC requirement to its supply chain. Again, in theory, it should be based on a contract or solicitation that requires it. But from what I understand, the large primes are kind of leaning in on the CMMC and kind of forcing their supply chain to either tell them where they are with their CMMC journey or notifying them that they need to go out and get a level 2 assessment. But again, it's still a contractual obligation. It's not a law that's going to strike you down or, get you in trouble if you don't do it. It's a contract. It's a relationship situation. So if you have a relationship with a vendor or supplier or anybody and somebody's asking you to do it, don't tell them that I told you didn't have to, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that from a government perspective, it only applies if you want to win a contract that has the CMMC as a requirement. And accordingly, the primes are going to flow it down to their supply chain, because all prime contractors are required to flow down the DFARS 7012 and all the other clauses that are applicable to the vendors that are supplying parts or services for that contract. Myth number 2, people believe that you must use a consultant or an implementer or some other service provider that has been approved by the Cyber AB. And that is not true. It was early on in the Cyber AB's life. They still have a badge or like a thing you can get from the Cyber AB that's called like a certified professional or something like this. And the CMMC AB tried to tell people that if you wanted to have a qualified consultant, they had to have this badge. That's not true. The only service provider person that needs to have any sort of qualification from the Cyber AB are those C3PAOs and the assessors. Any CMMC assessment done by an organization that is not a C3PAO will not be recognized by the Department of Defense for the CMMC DFARS requirement. And then myth number 3, I think we've hit this a couple times, but it says somehow there's this belief that the CMMC always requires a third-party assessment, and that's just not true. A CMMC level 1 is always a self-assessment. CMMC level 2 can either be a C3PAO, which is a third party, but it can also be a self-assessment. And again, while the CIO's guidance is not binding on anybody, they believe that there is going to be like a significant mix of the two. It's unclear what the actual mix will be, but it's not like 90% third party and 10% level 2. That doesn't seem to be CIO's anticipation, and doesn't look like right now, the little bit I've seen, it doesn't look like that is all shaking out to be third party. There does seem to be some self-assessment options in contracts. And then yes, the CMMC level 3 is always a third party assessment. So I think, yeah, so that's the last substantive slide. But I just wanted to reiterate, like, our objective of the CMMC Launchpad is to support the small and medium-sized businesses across the defense industrial base by providing not just like information, but actionable information and guidance that you can hopefully take from these webinars and go implement them today, or at least, start having these conversations, these meaningful conversations to get your organization closer to either being CMMC compliant or understanding what you need to do in order to engage somebody to help you understand where you are and where you might need to go in an affordable manner, because there just seems to be an overabundance of companies that want to provide consulting services and tools, and they're all like, there's a lot of money to be made here. But there's also, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be done in an efficient and straightforward manner, and giving people information is the best way to help companies in the beginning understand what they need to do so they know where to go, and they won't necessarily be tricked or, kind of buying things that you don't need to buy. So we are here to try to cut through the noise and provide legitimate information that you guys can use in order to implement the CMMC requirements, because at the end of the day, the goal is a secure and safe defense industrial base to facilitate, national security. And that is what our mission is as individuals, and why we came together to create the CMMC Launchpad. So to that end, we have a series of webinars. Webinars, loosely, the different color bubbles mean different things. And Martine, you might have to correct me on what these bubbles mean, but we have a series of events like this, where it's, educational, hopefully informing what's going on over different topics. And then we're planning to bring on some SMEs, some vendors, tool providers, people who are experts and who want to convey information, but who are also willing to offer to small businesses in the DIB transparent pricing, reasonable pricing, and willing to work with the defense industrial base in a way to make sure that they're giving them the services they need without the stuff they don't at an affordable price. And then we're also going to have some Q&A session, like open line Fridays, or party lines, where we will open a Teams meeting and allow people to join and ask questions, dumb questions, hard questions, random questions. Like, we would be happy to answer all of those, because there just right now seems to be more questions than answered. And if anybody on this call or future calls have ideas for topics or conversations that should be had, or you want to have, let us know. We will, try to accommodate the best that we can and try to find speakers that meet those needs and those wants of the community. Because again, we're trying to serve the defense industrial base, so let us know how we can help you. And we have an event calendar on our website, which there's URLs in 2 slides for our website. So, and I think everybody's going to get a copy of the slide anyway, and this is a direct link to the website for the event calendar. Okay, and I've talked really quickly for almost 40 minutes, so I want to open it up to see if anybody has any questions, because I don't see any in the chat. Sorry, I'm looking over here because I have 2 screens, so I apologize for paying attention. Ooh, I see Paul has a question. Can I unmute him? Or can you unmute him?
Yeah, let me see if I can real quick.
There we go. Yeah, okay. So Paul, I allowed you to have microphone access. Maybe you'll be able to unmute yourself. No.
He could type his question into the Q&A too. That would work.
I wonder if I can unmute. Paul, if I unmute, no, I don't think I can. Well, yeah, Paul, if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A and I can answer it if you would like. So I see Joe and Martine put questions in here. I guess I missed that. I apologize. But the question was about for CMMC level 2, what is a POAM and how does it impact my SPURS score? So I apologize for using acronyms. The POAM is the plan of action and milestones for any of the 110 controls that have gaps for them. So it could be a small gap, it could be a huge gap, it could be just one of the assessment objectives, or it could be the whole thing. But for whatever gap you have, you must also have a corresponding plan of action with milestones for how to remediate that gap. And the way that it impacts your SPURS score is you lose points. So the scoring for SPURS is you start with 110, the perfect score, and then for every control that you are missing, you subtract the corresponding number of points. And so if you have a POAM, you will not have a perfect 110 score, because otherwise you would not have a POAM. So if you have 110, there should be no gaps and therefore no POAM. But if you do not have a perfect score, if you have anything less than 110, you should have at least one plan of action and milestones for fixing the gap that was identified. All right, I don't see any more questions, which is okay. Not everybody wants to speak in front of others. Like, you can always email us questions. You can email us at info@launchpadcmmc.com, or you can schedule a consultation or just visit the website. There's some material out there where, we've launched fairly recently. So please let us know if there's information that we can put on the website to help you guys, or if we can help you in some way, please contact us and let us know, because that's literally why we are here to help, or trying to help. So let us know how we can do that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will best turn it over to Martine or anybody else if there's any questions that we can discuss, happy to do that, or we can wrap up early and give people.
I could add one more thing. I think, Leslie hit on the idea of like providing full information so that you can make an informed decision about what's required to meet compliance. It's complicated, et cetera. We're here to help. The idea is to do this in a way that provides no obligation to you, so you can have that information and you can make an informed choice. Depending on what's in scope for you, it could be not that big of a lift, but in some cases it is a large lift. And so it's really front loading this so you understand, what the commitment is so that you can determine what budget you'll need, et cetera. What we're here to do is to help you from soup to nuts understand what the requirements are and then help you price it out in a way with vendors that are doing it at a reasonable cost. And so the idea is transparency from end to end. And so anything that we can do for that, we'd be happy to do. We provide all the resources through the CMMC Launchpad. So, feel free to avail yourself of those. They're there for ultimately for national security.
Yeah. Martine, do you have any closing comments before we wrap it up or anything?
No, nothing more to add that's really hasn't already been said. As both Leslie and Joe mentioned, please go to our website. It's meant to be the kind of like the one-stop shop in reference to CMMC. So just information and resources, whether they're, stuff from like the program to how, CMMC kind of came to be, what are the requirements, resources you can draw on, like as Leslie kind of highlighted, that from the government that you can kind of take advantage of to alleviate kind of from a cost perspective. And then as well as, service providers that have, done this and that will have, transparent pricing depending on what your needs may be to fully implement a CMMC or, cybersecurity program for your company. So just come to us, let us know. We're here to answer questions and help in any way we can. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.